So we cut out again. So that's our moral dilemma as Christians solved, totally solved. Because we see the narratives leading to events which will lead to this, which involve the person of God as a person. So ironically, some of the prophecies Kim Clement gave are like, you're doing this for this reasons against these people, but you're doing it to me. I am God. So we've got to have that higher ground, not just a higher ground because of what the Bible says about what will happen to Israel or Israel's place in the whole grand scheme of things, but the basis of who God is and his plan and what he wants in the world. And clearly then a lot of the narrative then, if we bring the whole thing back together, that is against Israel is excruciatingly dangerous and evil. And it, again, we construct that as an idea, and you might not necessarily agree with that, but like as an idea that it's not, it doesn't really hold up, does it? So we've got to find the solid ground to stand on and not stand on this like fog-like language that's been used, that has been used in a way it is to confuse us and to cause paralysis. So really what it's saying is we've got to stand with Israel. There's a beautiful and brilliant sermon on that was published just before the whole thing kicked off. You need to actually, that is the perspective that we need to hold in these times. And that's it really. Don't think I really want to say anything else. So I think we covered it all from my basic point of view. There's probably been one or two things I've missed, but it doesn't really matter too much. We're just trying to get the narrative going and get a discussion going and dive into it. So that's the kind of overview. Now I'm actually going to step back and go, well, what's the wider scene? And that's extremely dangerous. So no one in the West who's protesting understands anything of why all the Western nations are very pro-Israel. We've also got a discussion of what will happen, and it's kind of obvious. We don't really need to discuss. What we know on that is like they have the Jewish mindset that they will do everything to preserve their nation. If they don't, they themselves are up for annihilation, because no one's going to stop them being annihilated. It's them who are going to stop themselves in their own land, and they're in their own land. So what they're going to do, it's obvious. And then you've got the whole geopolitical narrative. So if you watch the video of the Indian dude, he like makes some very extraordinary claims, but ones that I think are factually correct. So I've already introduced this idea that there's two brands of Islam who are totally opposed. Not if, when Israel are evicted from their land, and then following on another issue would be if in this war there is Hamas get a foothold, say, in Israel or in the West Bank or whatever happens, like those nations who are in the non-terrorist group, put it that way, will begin to find actually the existential threat as a nation is now against them, to certain degrees. And this guy makes his point, this Indian guy, and very, very well makes his point. So although they have to collectively and publicly say they disagree, actually the issue is privately they don't. Privately they want this war to continue, to stop any issue to do with their future and the existential threats. So they're actually joined with Israel. on this issue, and it's a bigger issue than just religion. Because even their Islamic religion is totally different from the Islamic religion of, say, the terrorists, including the Palestinians and Hamas and Iran. So there are much bigger things going on that no one's talked about. As I said in the last video, this guy's saying things that are true that I see because I think I've got a better perspective, and like no one else is really saying at all. So there's that perspective. So the third one is why the Western countries are allianced with Israel. Well, if you step back from this war, there's two wars going on. So what you realise is the West, including America, but particularly America. So what's going on in America? Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff up for grabs in America in terms of to do with political futures in America, and a lot of issues coming up and a lot of things to be resolved and solved on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, Democrat, Republican, and it's a real critical time. Again, no one's really talking about this, but Biden as a president is beginning to be done. His presidency's beginning to be done, and it's looking doubtful he'll get re-elected, would be the final result. Now, you can disagree on that. You cannot, but like, again, we don't look at it so black and white, and we say, well, if we want to, we can say, well, is the opposite true? Does he look completely secure? Like it's a done, he'll get re-elected? Like, you've got to be joking, would be the answer. So he needs some policy wins. There's that. So you've got the West and the kind of East, and that's a repetitive thing. You find out actually where does that begin? Prophetically, it begins in the Bible with Daniel. Maybe we should dive in and jump into all that stuff at some point. Well, let's do that when we get to it. But anyway, my point would be there are two really important wars, and people are talking about a third. So the third they're talking about is China and Taiwan. There's sort of a whole bunch of geopolitics going on. So some people are already talking about this, looking to this and going, well, if things go really badly for the West, that's the next war. Taiwan invading, being invaded by China. And that will, if the West ideologically lose that war, then things get worse. So we're kind of headed off in a particular direction, or we're heading off in a opposite direction. And it's all playing out. It's all very, very, very serious if you take out God, religion, spirituality, who's right and who's wrong. It's all a bit crazy as well. But anyway, that's something else. So there's these two wars going on. So you've got a war between Russia and Ukraine, which the West are heavily involved in, coming in on Europe's side. And now you've got a war in the Middle East. So the end goal, or the end point of my point would be, if the West loses both those wars, ideologically they're in big, big trouble. America is in big, 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 big trouble. And that's part of the issue, and I'll explain why. So both these wars are proxy wars. So what that means is you've got people involved in the wars who aren't fighting, but they're using one of the sides to fight against. And this is part of the issue with the Ukraine-Russia war. So we've basically been presented all this information about Russia, like Russia's evil, which is like, there's some of it, I mean, this is the same with everything if we analyse it in terms of what we're told. It's like, some of it may well possibly be true. Some of it definitely is not true. It's propaganda from the West. Some of that is propaganda from the East, from Russia. And some of it's not quite how they say it is. So it's grayscale. But we've basically been bombarded with information at the start, like this is a holy war or a righteous war for a good purpose. This is holding up democracy. Well, it's not. That's a lie. That's a total lie. So you can unpack the whole thing. And you can disagree, not disagree. We've got no time to do that here. So we're not going to do that. At some point, we will unpack some stuff. So we want to highlight the important areas that are important in the consciousness of the whole debate with the Russia-Ukraine war that are relevant to now and it being a proxy war. The first reality is it is a proxy war, and it's one that the West losing. Ukraine is going to lose the war because it's not going well. What do we mean? Well, this year we've had this whole thing. So the beginning is the whole blah 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 narrative, which is just basically political BS, and from both sides, Ukraine, Russia, and the West. Who is the big instigator of that? Of the untruths, let's say, or the propaganda in the war? Actually, I think it's the West. Again, truth is truth, and truth will out itself. I think it's beginning to out itself that the West is involved in not just a proxy war, but in full-scale propaganda, as in lies against the Russians, in support of Ukraine in the proxy war. So the narrative this year would be the West saying to Ukraine, we're going to give you all this money, we're going to give you all this military equipment, go and smash the Russians, basically push them back, and ideally kick the Russians out of Ukraine. And then there's a spring offensive to do that. So if you actually analyse the spring offensive and you say to yourself, forget the propaganda, which we won't forget in a bit, is this spring offensive, is this war within a war working? Who's won the war? What you find out factually is, despite the propaganda and the stuff in the news media, which is another thing, that Ukraine have hardly taken any territory from the Russians at all. It's tiny, it's minute. That's not been reported. The Russians have taken more territory of the Ukrainians than the Ukrainians have taken of the Russians. That's not been reported. So let's forget the not reported stuff. So in terms of the propaganda, we've got a bit of a issue. Again, is the opposite correct? No, it's not. There are issues, clearly. What we've been told is not strictly true. It's therefore propaganda. How much is it propaganda and how much of it is not propaganda? Well, we'll find out. But certainly the overall narrative is a lie. The actual reality of what's going on the ground in the war is not good for Ukraine. Therefore, because it's a proxy war, it's not good for America. You have to remember that. It's not good for America, not good for the West at all. It's really bad. In my mind, this war's done. It's lost already. The issue is how long it remains and what is the damage and cost, because the damage and cost at the moment, if they stopped it, is immense, and how much the West want to continue pouring billions of whatever, so for the Americans, billions of pounds into the Ukraine to continue to fight the proxy war, whatever they just say. At the moment, let's just give up, let's accept defeat, and obviously what's going on with the second war really affects that. But this is the issue. It's you realise if the goal is to do ABC and ABC hasn't happened and nothing like ABC's happened, then it's lost. It's not going well. So let's bring the media into that. So what's the media narrative now? Here in the UK, in the last, while we've had this spring offensive going on by Ukraine against the Russians, there's probably been 2, 3, well, more than 2 certainly, but maybe as little as 4, 5, 6 actual reports of the spring offensive that actually states what's going on. Now, when you read those, they give so little information, it's unbelievable. So actually, the media is not telling you what's going on, and why are they doing that? They're doing it deliberately. It's propaganda. So we're in this propaganda war, in the proxy war, in the real war, the whole media system is involved. So the issue is, can we actually trust the media to do what the media is supposed to do anymore? in the West? The answer is no. We'll deal with that in a bit, and we'll unpack that more in the future. But that's a serious concern just in this Israel Hamas / Palestinian war, because if we can't trust them to do it there, we certainly can't trust them to do it here, and that's what we're seeing. And it's terrifying, to be honest, if you really think about it, the way our Western culture, what it's heading for, which is doom, certainly gloomy and doomy, and ultimate doom. That's kind of the cliff we're suicidally jumping off as a culture, and that's, I think, being exposed. So it's a proxy war. It's not going well. All the stuff we're being told is basically lies. It's propaganda. If you actually analyse the propaganda here, you realise there's propaganda from all three sides, but the ones who are being the most honest are the Russians, ironically. They seem to actually report the war more accurately than anyone else wants to. That's not to say there isn't any propaganda from Russia or from Putin. There certainly is. It's just like less than Ukraine and the West, and quite considerably West in some instances, and it's a bit embarrassing. I mean, this is the whole point. The whole thing is just embarrassing for the West, and it's kind of like at some point the West is going to be shamed by the rest of the world, unlike the West has probably ever been ashamed before, ever, because of what's going down. But anyway, that war will play out how that war plays out, but it's not good. Biden needs a quick win. So Israel for him is a quick win. If you understand the political narrative, it doesn't matter what anyone says.